The story began tragically, namely with the execution of one family. The girl looked at her executed father and mother, while the executioner announced the execution of her brother. She did not believe what was happening. They were accused of deliberately poisoning the royal family, but she knew that was not true. And now she was faced with the one who deliberately framed her family, Crown Prince Dylan von Vasilios. The prince just laughed at all the girl's suffering, pointing out that she could only be angry at her own impotence. The young man ordered her brother to be taken away, because now it was his turn to be executed. The sister screamed. Liam was her only brother, a twin. She would believe anything, but not that this innocent child was involved in a crime. The boy took one last farewell look at his sister. No matter how she begged, it was all in vain. So she got rid of her only joy, and now she was all alone. Tears flowed like a river, if she didn't try to free herself, but she couldn't do anything. Finally, it was her turn, as the prince came to inform her. The girl no longer had anything to fear, so she gave him one last look of hatred for the fact that he dared to do such a thing to her family. While she was being dragged to execution, she kept thinking about whether she was a good sister. At the academy, Liam was constantly bullied, and the girl did not even suspect it. She only understood that he should not have been allowed there. If she could have guessed that all this had long been the plan of this cruel prince, she would not have allowed this to happen. She really wanted to go back in time to fix everything. As soon as the executioner's axe touched her neck, she woke up instantly. The hands automatically reached for the neck, but everything was intact. She didn't have time to wake up when her brother joyfully jumped into her arms. The girl could not believe that all this was true, because she remembered recent events very well. The brother also could not understand what was happening to his sister. He was happy that she woke up. Liam explained that everyone was very worried about her because she had gone to bed with a high fever all night, so it was a miracle that she came to. The young man was very worried that something might happen to his sister. She did not understand at all what it was about, so her brother tried to remember her unfortunate fall in training yesterday. Everyone was very scared for the young lady then, and the parents almost went crazy. She quickly began apologizing for this, but the brother continued and informed her that if she hadn't woken up, she would have missed the initiation ceremony, which was supposed to take place tomorrow, and said that he didn't really want to go. Hearing this, the sister smiled warmly, but immediately said that they must attend this ceremony. Almost immediately, she realized that she had forgotten exactly where her brother was going, what he even took offense at. The young man was once again afraid that everything was not well with his sister and that her lapses in memory were the consequences of yesterday's blow. So he immediately ran to call a doctor. But Lenali tried to stop him. The girl quickly began to assure that she just had a bad dream, which is why she got a little confused in the events. In her mind, she tried to understand what was really happening. She was sure that now they should be 19 years old. But looking at her brother, she saw that he looked a little younger. After collecting everything in a pile, I realized that now they are 16 and it is time for admission. Her beloved Liam was the most precious thing she had. He had much better magic than a sword, but from generation to generation all the men in their family became knights, so her brother had no choice. The young man was forced to enter the Fortis Academy for the knighthood department, but he did not show any special abilities, because of which he was ridiculed by other students, because of which Prince Dylan caught his eye. He was the one who took away their happiness. She understood that if her brother once again entered this faculty, the tragedy would repeat itself and she could not allow it to happen. But she did not yet know how to avoid it. All this time, Liam was silent, but finally sadly said that he wished he could be as skilled with a sword as his sister. Although they were twins, he saw a significant difference between them. He said that if Lenali had been born a boy, things could have been different. At this moment, the girl jumped out of bed and approached her brother, who gave her a wonderful idea that she had not thought of. She pulled his ear and whispered something. The brother was worried by what he heard, and said that such an undertaking was too risky, because if they were exposed, there would be trouble for both of them. But it was certain. The only thing she asked was for her brother to trust her, and she would take care of the rest herself. With these words, she finally got out of bed and quickly got dressed. A few minutes later, Urvuchko broke into her father's office. Without even saying hello, she said that she wanted to talk to him, but the man did not pay attention to it, but immediately ran to her daughter and hugged her tightly. He began to ask about her well-being. In the end, the father calmed down a little and let his daughter go. The girl breathed a sigh of relief because her father almost strangled her. Everyone laughed a little at this, and in a minute Lenali became serious. She thought for a long time about what would happen if not Liam. But she entered the academy. But she wanted to check it in person. To convince the father, you need to act decisively. And the young lady knew that. Without saying a word, she walked over to the sword stand and quickly took out one of them. The girl brought it closer to her hair and stopped for a moment. Her father and brother shouted at her not to do this. With one sharp movement, she cut off her hair and it fell to the ground. The young lady resolutely declared that she would enter the academy instead of her brother. The look of the girl said that she did not want to hear objections. She stood on the threshold of the academy and her eyes widened in amazement at the grandeur of this place. She was dressed in uniform, and unsuspecting students of the country's best academy passed by. Fortis Academy was the country's main training center for mages and knights. There were only 50 places for boys in the Faculty of Chivalry, and 50 places for girls and boys in the Faculty of Magic. The threshold for the academic year was quite high. No more than 150 people recovered. For a moment, I doubted that it might not pass, but the memories of the past tragedy forced me to convince myself otherwise. Of course, after such a statement that she made a couple of days ago in her father's office, no one was left indifferent. Brother and father were shocked to say the least. Not believing this, the Marquis barely uttered a few words. After recovering from this news, he began to scold his daughter for this, because she must have forgotten that next year she had a planned wedding with Duke Wergman, and regardless of this, she cut her braids. The man was very upset by this, so much so that he could not hold back his tears, which quite alarmed the children. The daughter tried to calm her father, because she knew how much he loved her, but she could not back down. The girl understood that she had to stand her ground until the end, so she began to convince him that knighthood was not for her brother. His element was magic, and in this he showed himself the best of all. However, the Marquis stuck to the principles of the family, because all the men in the family were knights. Who then will take the position of heir if not Liam? The girl immediately came forward offering her candidacy. She began to explain to her father her idea of changing, that I wanted to change into men's clothes and enter the academy, get the necessary knowledge. Listening to his daughter's ideas, the Marquis gradually became angry. In the end, the man couldn't stand it and said that chivalry was only for boys and she would quickly be exposed as a lie. Although she assured him that this would not happen, but she had classes in housekeeping. Liam could attend these classes because he had a knack for such things. But the young man was very surprised to hear this. While the children argued, the father could not stand it and did not allow these ideas to materialize. The Lors family would be finished. The father began to assure his daughter that she, as a girl, had no need to hold a sword in her hands. He wanted to say that her happiness was in something else. But his daughter interrupted him and said that she did not want to be happy only after getting married successfully. In addition, she did not think that Duke Wergman would accept her as such. However, if she did not try to speak convincingly, it seemed that it did not bring results. Seeing this, the girl began to beg her father to listen to her. Linali could not allow that tragedy. She looked at her father with such a pleading look that he could not stand it, and finally allowed her to put her idea into practice, much to the surprise of the children. But he only gave her a year to prove her abilities. The girl agreed to her father's terms without objection. She was glad that she was able to get her way, although she was worried that she might have been too aggressive. And Liam had no problem replacing her. Walking through the park, she remembered how her dress fit her brother perfectly. This memory caused her to laugh, and the girl did not even notice how other girls began to whisper about her. And when she heard it, she looked around. From their conversation, she realized that the others had no idea that there was actually a girl in front of them. For a moment, she thought that her brother was popular, but still she could not stand out so as not to be exposed. The brother said that he accidentally bumped into the prince at the dedication ceremony, so the young lady understood that she had to be as careful as possible so as not to run into an unnecessary fatal conflict. Suddenly, she heard shouts of joy behind her. Looking around, she saw the world getting out of the carriage fascias. The girls were glowing with happiness. When they saw each of them, Prince Dylan was at the head. Linali did not share the joy. Fascias, the rulers of the academy, those who supported their country, the mage family of Duke Chrysia, the knights of Duke Osman, and those responsible for running Duke Bahart's state. The three main dukes supporting the country, whose heirs entered this academy last year. The crown prince, too, which probably caused quite a stir among students, and not only. None of the teachers had power over them. In fact, it was these four who managed the academy, which is why they got the name Fascias. Only Prince Dylan was the one who falsely accused and executed her family. Passing by, the prince noticed that this time they were not greeted so warmly and could not understand what was the matter, until suddenly he heard that some were talking about the newcomer. "I saw him in the crowd," she was called, and looking around saw that she was noticed by the prince, although she wanted to avoid these meetings. The heir gleefully began to make fun of the girl, although he had no idea who was in front of him. It was clear that the prince was rushing to a conflict, but she tried to remain silent. One of the prince's friends wanted to stop Dylan, but they didn't let him because they wanted to watch the show. Lenali was a little confused. He grabbed her chin and looked into her eyes. The girl did not expect to find herself in such a situation, because she tried her best to avoid it. She glared at the prince in return. The prince, on the contrary, liked this defiant look and asked her name. Without hiding anything, she immediately called herself by her brother's name. The young man immediately remembered their family, because he knew that there was one girl there. The boy began to say that the daughter of the Lores was like a beast and liked to spar with men. He also knew that she was going to get married soon, but the party was not one of the best and he gave up. After this statement, she really wanted to say everything she was thinking, but she understood that she had to restrain herself. Instead, she gave another angry look. The prince was amused by this, and taking out his sword, he challenged her. The prince was sure of his victory even before the duel, so he announced that she would become his servant after that. She was surprised and angry at these words, but forced herself to restrain herself. Dylan saw that there was no reaction from Liam, so he continued to hurl insults at him. But eventually the insults reached the family as a whole, and it did not escape her. She was angry. The girl could still endure the insults that were said to her personally. She did not pay attention to it, but she could not allow the Laracy family to be insulted. Taking out the sword in an instant, she pointed it at the prince, accepting the challenge. Almost immediately after this, the confrontation between them began and one of the prince's worlds quickly began to lead the rest of the students away from the rivals. Lenali was never inferior to the prince in battle. Everyone around was really surprised by this, and even the prince noticed the opponent's abilities. He didn't want to give in to someone who had such a feminine face, but the novice had little to no strength. They fought almost to the death. None of them wanted to yield to the other, and the prince did not want to lose the newcomer. But he saw that it would not be easy to overcome it. No matter how hard he tried, Liam didn't give in either. She remembered a time when she was practicing her swords against the knights of her house. She could defeat even one of the strongest soldiers. Then the knights even regretted that the lady was a girl. In terms of her strength and abilities, she was not inferior to even the best, so everyone was sure that she would have a great future in chivalry, if only she were a boy. However, the prince did not know this. Dylan saw the potential of the rival and could not understand how this boy had remained in the shadows until now. Lenali understood that this confrontation had no right to lose. For the sake of the family, for the sake of his brother, he must win. And with one last lightning movement, she knocked the sword out of the prince's hands and brought him to his knees, pointing her weapon at his neck. This caused great surprise to everyone who watched the battle. Some of the prince's companions even took it positively, because they knew that the heir to the throne was skilled with swords. The girls from the Faculty of Magic were even saddened by the defeat of their favorite. She breathed a sigh of relief. This victory brought peace, but she was in no hurry to rejoice in public. The girl calmed down a little and, looking at her opponent, now expected an apology as agreed. In response, the prince looked her in the eyes for a long time, but finally began to stand up, because he always kept his word, but warned that one should not pick up one's nose in advance just because of luck. Without another word, he turned to his companions and walked away, leaving her to watch him. She was overcome with incredible rage, because she did not think that she was lucky. She honestly won. She went to her class in a gloomy mood, because she vowed to somehow contact the prince, and already on the first day, she managed to stumble upon a duel with him, so she understood that she would not be able to avoid him anymore. However, she was sure that with these confrontations, she showed that she would not allow her family to be affected. Opening the door to the classroom, she immediately met surprised looks and whispers, and understood what they were talking about. She guessed that the rumors would not make themselves wait long, but now no one would want to bring trouble on themselves. Lady remembered that Liam was also lonely in this academy and could not make friends. Lenali knew for sure that everything would be the opposite for her, because she started making enemies and started with the most influential. But she wanted to make every effort to have at least one friend. Suddenly, someone called out to her. One of the classmates approached and began to talk enthusiastically about the duel she had won. which he had watched. She looked at him in surprise. The young man continued and introduced himself by name. Agni offered his hand as a sign of greeting and a new acquaintance, and the girl could not believe her luck that she met a candidate for friends almost immediately. She immediately shook hands and called herself by her brother's name. Hearing her last name, the new comrade immediately apologized for not addressing her with due respect as an aristocrat. But she was not offended, because she considered everyone here equal, except fascists, but kept silent about them. Having calmed down a little, the young man said that everyone around told him not to get in touch with the Lors family, but he didn't care, because he considered Luam to be good. She was surprised to hear about the avoidance. However, the words to urge everyone not to communicate with her alarmed. She looked around suspiciously, trying to recognize what was being said about her, because it became interesting what all this could mean. After all, from that moment on, he and Agni began to spend all their time together. He turned out to be a very friendly and positive guy. She suddenly thought that her brother would be glad to have such a friend. However, one day something terrible happened. Returning from the library, she looked at her watch and noticed that she had been there longer than expected, so she sped up because they were already waiting for her. As she passed by, she noticed a whole crowd, but she did not understand why there were so many people on the street. Suddenly, she noticed the prince in the crowd, so she began to approach to find out what was the matter. The next moment, she noticed that someone was being taken out of the fountain, and she looked closely and saw that it was Agni. She immediately rushed to help her friend, pushing the crowd, but someone stopped her, preventing her from going further. Pointing his sword at her, the prince appeared in front of her. The girl began to demand an explanation as to why she and her friend were treated so cruelly, to which she received the answer that he had disobeyed the order to ignore her. The young lady could not believe that it was only because of this stupid order that the unfortunate boy was beaten so badly. The prince began to accuse her of this. She did not understand what she was really guilty of. Paying no more attention to the prince, she rushed to help her friend, but he was unconscious. The girl wanted to take him to the medical center, but her ignoring made Dylan angry. He gave an order to the same guys who beat her friend to finish her off, and they obeyed without objection. The boys were already ready to strike, and she was preparing for death. But she was not going to run away. The students had already raised their swords, and she only covered herself with her hand, not hoping to survive. But the pain never came. Opening her eyes, she saw a magic circle above her, but she did not know who protected her. Looking around, she saw one of the prince's friends. Dylan yelled at Kyle, accusing him of climbing when he wasn't asked, but the young man accused his friend of going too far. The prince became even more angry, and even the words that an innocent boy could die did not calm him down. The heir did not want even a friend to get in his way, so he wanted to drive him away. Linali watched the quarrel of her friends and could not understand why one of them saved her. Another one of Phacius interrupted the quarrel of comrades. Osmond's heir changed the subject to tomorrow's action. Eris was to be held tomorrow, and the crown prince saw a great opportunity to take revenge, and for this he wanted to invite Liam. He approached the boy and pretended to apologize for his behavior. Such a change in Dylan's mood alarmed, and she did not expect to hear an apology. The prince invited her to tomorrow's tea party, which quite surprised the surrounding audience, as well as the young lady herself. Everyone around began to whisper about it. Envious voices sounded everywhere, but she could not understand what was happening, which is why she hesitated to answer. This whole situation seemed suspicious to her. The prince went on to say that if Liam agreed to join the tea party, he had a bright future ahead of him, and his father would be only too happy about it, an opportunity that could not be passed up. She looked around and realized that she had fallen into a kind of trap, because behind her other students were waiting all this time watching the conversation. The girl saw that she could not refuse. Knowing that it could be a trap, she had to agree. The prince smiled gloatingly at this and, returning, announced the time and place. The girl remained gloomily sitting in the water, looking around. Of course, she heard about Eris. The origin of the name was from the word aristocracy, the central body of the academy, in the center of which were the chosen. The participants of Eris were the faces of the academy. Fascias, of course, too. Tea parties were held regularly. Everyone wanted to go there at least once, because after getting access there, the ladies became even more popular in society, and the guys got the opportunity to enter the elite path of the bureaucracy. First of all, this tea party was significant in order to raise one's own advantage. Washing in the shower, she kept thinking about it, but thoughts about Agni did not leave her. She was very worried about him after what he had experienced. Breaking these thoughts for a moment, She looked around to make sure no one came in, because the truth might be revealed. Having calmed down again, her thoughts went to her friend, because he received all these injuries because of her, almost to the point of death. She was also worried about whether he would even want to continue communicating with her after this, because the prince was now a threat not only to her. She couldn't figure out what Dylan was up to, but she had a bad feeling. She really didn't want to go to this tea party. Exhaling, she turned off the water and went into the shower, but suddenly Kyle walked in front of her. The boy froze for a moment. After regaining consciousness, she covered herself. But it was too late. The girl did not understand how he got in here, because she definitely did everything in order to be warned in advance about someone's arrival. With a sly smile, the young man finally confirmed his guesses. Linali winced at what she heard. Although she took all precautionary measures, she was still exposed, and not by anyone, but by a member of Fascius. She didn't know what to do, but she couldn't let the truth come out. Sensing her hopelessness, she knelt before the young man who exposed her and silently waited for the verdict. She told everything, even about the fact that she had to enter the academy instead of her brother. Kyle found this situation quite interesting. The girl understood that she was in a bad situation, so she began to beg him not to reveal her secret. Instead, the young man asked what her brother did. She replied that instead of her, Liam went through all these trainings that were assigned to her. Hearing this, the boy fell silent for a moment, then burst into loud laughter. It was something new for him. When he calmed down a little, he didn't hesitate to call her a little crazy. But she thought about it too, so she didn't take offense. In addition, she raised a sword at Dylan, which is funny, but dangerous. The girl tried again to persuade him not to tell her secret, at which he looked questioningly. If she didn't want to explain everything, but she couldn't admit that her entire family depended on this secret. Linali was willing to do anything to keep it a secret, so she told about it. Kyle liked it, so he agreed to keep it a secret, but on the condition that he would tell as soon as he got bored. He even said that from now on she would have to entertain him. The girl was a little indignant at this, but remained silent. Nevertheless, it was insulting that this guy took advantage of her weakness in this way. The next day, she went to class in a depressed mood, but before she could open the door, all her classmates immediately ran to her with questions about the tea party. They were really into it. Her classmates simply bombarded her with questions, and she barely had time to hear at least one. She couldn't believe that even yesterday they diligently pretended that she didn't exist, and today they didn't let her pass. Of course, the girl understood that the reason for this was only Eris, but she did not think that it would affect her life so much. Ignoring any more questions about the tea party, she immediately asked about Agni. His classmates awkwardly shrugged their shoulders and informed him that he was probably still resting, because he had received quite serious injuries. The girl again felt a strong blow to her conscience, because it was because of her. She promised herself that after the tea party she would definitely come to visit him and apologize for everything. But for now, she had the main goal: to successfully visit Eris. So she did that and went to the meeting. The prince already met her with a glance, and as soon as she came closer, he praised her for her courage, because he thought that she would not come. The rest of the Eris participants looked at her in silence, even somewhat surprised. Some arrogantly. After looking everyone in the eyes, she understood that she was thrown into a cage to a wild animal, so she immediately began to prepare for the worst of the options for the development of events. The prince introduced Liam to everyone with a smile. After the introduction, the prince pointed to her seat. She went to one of the chairs, but Dylan immediately stopped her and pointed behind her to where the maid was standing. It was there that the place indicated by the prince was for her. She immediately understood that they wanted to make her a waiter, but she decided to ask again because she knew that she was invited to a tea party. The prince confirmed, but after a minute added that only as a waiter. Quiet laughter from the rest of the participants was heard behind. Looking around, she now understood what the prince was trying to achieve. He wanted the eldest son of the Marquis to serve not only him, but also all the members of Eris. Now it became clear that all this was in order to humiliate and mock not only her, but also her family. She got very angry, but immediately controlled herself because she understood that they would not come to her defense. There was no point in contradicting the prince because she understood that this was exactly what he was waiting for. The heiress saw Liam's reaction and wanted to send him away, but she agreed after stepping over herself. The guy didn't expect this at all, so the guest's answer surprised him quite a bit. He couldn't even finish. The girl turned with an indifferent look to begin her duties. Everyone was surprised. She approached the maid to ask about her task, The girl hesitated a little. Although serving the table was a servant's job, Lenali also had some experience, so she was confident in herself. Finally, the maid spoke up and asked her to serve the members of Fascias. She agreed without objection. Approaching the service, she noticed that one of the cups was significantly different from the others. She asked the servants whose mug it was, and they immediately answered that it was Dylan's personal cup, which she had already guessed. Without another word, the young lady began to pour the tea. Watching the son of the Marquis deftly pour the tea, the other heiress members began to mock him in whispers. Lenali noticed this but remained silent. She silently demonstrated all her talent. After such a noble movement, everyone fell silent and began to admire her with admiration. The girl only imperceptibly smiled so that no one would notice. It was not difficult for her to surprise the audience. She liked to drink tea, so she knew all the subtleties of its preparation. Of all the manners she had, this was the one she was most praised for. The prince, seeing the reaction of the rest, got a little angry because he did not expect such a thing. The girl approached him and placed a cup of tea in front of him without saying a word. She was somewhat surprised that he had a mug that was different from the others. I saw that he put himself above others. The lady moved a little to the side and suddenly stopped. The memories of the past were like an electric shock, and she remembered some fragments when her brother was accused of putting poison in the prince's cup. Her eyes widened with fear and shock at the realization that it could all happen again. Because of that situation, Liam was expelled from the academy. She scolded herself for forgetting all this. The girl did not want to believe that the fact that she had gone back in time would not change the situation in any way. The voice of the prince was heard, announcing the beginning of Aris. Lenali immediately rushed to him. She took the cup from the prince and drank the tea herself. In a moment, she felt very sick, and finally it became clear that the tea was poisonous. The girl started to fall, and Dylan managed to catch her at the last minute. He called out to her as hard as he could, but she slowly lost consciousness until she finally blacked out. The rest of the participants were very scared. The last thing the girl saw was the worried look of the prince. Even knowing that she was going to die, she had to do it. The girl guessed that the tea could be poisonous, so she drank it to dispel suspicions. Otherwise, she would have been blamed herself. After she finally passed out, all this caused quite a stir among the rest of the participants, because no one could figure out what happened, but guessed that Liam had been poisoned. The prince was even more worried when he heard about it. It seemed that this word caused great horror in him, and he involuntarily plunged into the memories of the tragic past, to which he would not like to return. He remembered how his mother was in the same situation, but then, still small, he could not do anything. Suddenly, Kyle approached them and began to heal the poor woman. Everyone gathered to look. Everything turned out for the best, because the representative of the magicians of Chrysia could heal. However, the guy himself said that he did not do anything special, but only provided first aid, so treatment was needed. He took the unconscious girl from the hands of the prince and said that he would take her to the infirmary. Dylan did not resist, but only quietly agreed. The others also did not say anything, but only silently looked at the trail. It was quiet for a moment, and the heir of the Ottomans successfully noticed that Liam had saved someone with his act. On unsteady legs, the prince approached the table and leaned on it, and Bahart approached anxiously. He began to ask the prince if he was all right, but he could barely speak due to the stress he was under. The comrade was silent for a moment, and then sharply turned to the rest, forbidding them to leave this place. Meanwhile, Kyle had already taken her to the medical center. Although he knew that the girl was unconscious, he said that she was very lucky to be next to him. In addition, she could have been exposed, but he prevented this. The boy thought about today's situation. He realized that it was definitely not she who had poured the poison. The criminal's goal was the secret murder of the crown prince, but the girl stood up. In a moment, the young man was very angry, because Lenali had put her life in danger to save the prince, and this made him even more angry because someone had encroached on his beloved, so he promised himself to take cruel revenge. The next morning, she opened her eyes, but her head was still dizzy. She couldn't understand where she was. She didn't remember much from yesterday. The girl looked around and came to her senses a little. Suddenly, she heard someone's voice and slowly turned her head to the sound. The prince stood before her. The girl immediately jumped up, not believing her eyes, and wanted to know why he had come here. The prince did not want to hear ordinary phrases now. Instead, he immediately told Liam to explain everything that happened yesterday. She was suddenly speechless when she saw his expression. The girl was very frightened, did not know what to answer her. She saw that the prince was very angry, and was sure that now he would blame her for what had happened. She could not believe that she had condemned herself to execution again. She was very worried, not knowing what to do now. Without further ado, Dylan immediately asked her if there was poison in his cup on her right hand. Lenali immediately came to her senses and replied that she was innocent. The young man immediately asked how she found out that the tea was poisonous. She was shocked by this question because she could not tell that she had returned from the future, so she replied that it was intuition. The prince was quite surprised at such an answer, and she, seeing his reaction, began to explain. The girl saw that His Majesty's cup was different from the others, so she had a bad feeling. She was scared again, because someone did pour the poison, but it is not known who was the criminal. No one will confess for sure, so at that moment she could not think of anything other than to impersonate herself. Hearing this, in his opinion, stupid answer, the prince became even more angry. He couldn't fathom that it was only because of such stupidity that Liam would pretend like that. A little more and it might not happen at all. She was surprised at what she heard, because she could not understand why the prince was suddenly worried about her life. The air calmed down. He also could not understand why he was saved by the one to whom he had brought so much trouble. The girl was completely confused, because she had never seen the prince so upset. The young man, without looking her in the eye, remembering the terrible past, said that he no longer wanted anyone to die from poison again, sank at the prince's suffering appearance. It hurt to see him like this, but I couldn't comfort him because I didn't think it would be right now, so I was looking for a simple answer. She explained her concession by the fact that she was a knight, so it doesn't matter how much trouble the prince caused her. She first entered this faculty to protect her family, even if she herself would be under attack. In the future, she will also need to protect the prince himself because it is her duty, so it is better to start with something now. She had to say it to change the course of the future. The prince fell silent. For some time, he just stared silently in front of him, and she began to worry that something bad was going to happen now. And worst of all, she worried that the prince did not believe her words. But there was nowhere to run. The girl wanted to break the silence and had already started to speak, when suddenly the prince jumped out of his chair and began to shout loudly at her. He didn't want Liam to go through something like that again, because his life is also important. Dylan warned that if he saw him drink poison again, he would kill him with his own hands before the poison took effect. Lenali was stunned by what she heard. She didn't even have anything to answer, she just agreed. It was difficult for her to believe what was happening, and she began to hope that the future execution would eventually be avoided. Having collected his spirit a little, the prince spoke again and thanked for the rescue. The girl expected to hear anything, but there were definitely no words of thanks from the crown prince, so she could not control her emotions, and even leaned back on the bed from this. Dylan was a little embarrassed by this reaction. She couldn't believe that the prince was upset by such a thing, so she couldn't hold back and laughed out loud. The heir was indignant for a moment, because he did not understand why Liam was laughing, but this sincere laughter did not stop. Looking at how this laughter poured from the lips of the son of the Marquis, he imperceptibly smiled to himself. He suddenly realized that this boy was surprisingly cute when he smiled, and this confession shocked him. After her recovery, everyone began to meet her almost with fanfare, calling her the savior of His Majesty. The girls at the sight of Liam almost fainted with delight, but she did not understand it. On the way to class, he ran to meet her Agni, who also beamed with a smile at her current situation, because she suddenly became popular. However, she still didn't quite understand, so she wanted an explanation. The friend quickly said that because Liam saved the crown prince from the poison, everyone now considers him a hero. It was shocking, because she wanted to attract as little attention as possible. She did not want such a turn of events, and she did not want extra attention either. Agni, on the other hand, was only happy because his friend was now recognized by fascists themselves, but the girl could not share the friend's joy. The friend thought his end had come when he was captured by fascists, but Liam heroically saved him, for which he thanked him, and also announced that they had both been chosen for a battle of swords and magic, which he was happy about. She looked at her friend trying to find words, because he had suffered a lot because of her. But despite that, he was still her friend. She grabbed his hand and supported him for the battle. In the Battle of Swords and Magic took part selected from 4 academies, including Fortis. They risked the pride and honor of their institution at the annual meeting where they competed in strength or magic. It would not be an exaggeration to say that those who studied in these academies diligently improved for the sake of this action, all because the winner was given a place in the Imperial Guard. Therefore, now that she has also become the chosen one, she needs to live up to the name of the Lore family and eventually get her father to recognize her as his heir. She did not notice how she was being watched. On the way, they met two of the Fasias, and the boys greeted her and immediately inquired about her well-being. She replied that everything was fine, after which Bashart informed that the criminal was already being sought. The girl once again thanked for such a quick reaction, but she was no less worried about it, and she would like to find out who this stranger was as soon as possible, because in the past he had greatly framed her brother. Buckhart decided to change the subject and said that he was glad to see Liam in good health, because he was very lucky that Chrysia was there because he gave the antidote. She was stunned by what she heard. Lenali wanted to thank him for that, but she didn't know how. Kyle reassured him that everything was fine, but when he got closer, he said that from now on she would have to entertain him even longer. The girl was silent. The boys said goodbye and went on their way, and she stood and thought that this Fascias had planned, but she could not refuse because he knew her secret. Agni, who was captivated by her, was distracted from his thoughts. It seemed incredible to him that Liam could communicate so casually with Fascias, because he himself was afraid of them. She immediately replied that she was also still nervous in front of them. Suddenly I realized that I had forgotten something. The girl decided to return to the classroom to look for this thing there. A friend called after her so that she would not be late for training for the chosen ones. Lenali smiled back, promising to come on time. Someone was following her again, but she didn't notice. The young lady came to the dressing room where she thought she might have left her thing. She looked to see if anyone was around. Making sure that there was no one there, she left the shelter and went to the changing room, mentally apologizing to Agni for lying about the matter. But she could not change clothes in front of others. However, she had no idea that the pursuers were nearby all the time. The girl did not hear someone walking behind her, so she fell into a trap and was captured, not being able to move or scream. If she didn't try to get out, but nothing worked, the criminal was quite strong. She looked around at her attackers, but she couldn't recognize any of them. But she could definitely see that they weren't students. The man holding her said that he had nothing against her, but that was the order, so they had to hurt a little. She turned her head to him and mentally asked anyone for help. The chosen training arena was already quite crowded. Training was about to start, but Liam hadn't arrived yet, which surprised Dylan. But he realized it wasn't about him. At that moment, Agni had already run to the arena. He looked everywhere for his friend, but he was nowhere to be found, so he thought that he must be already at training, but he was not there either. Anxiety rose to the throat. Fascias noticed him but did not share his anxiety. He was scared in front of them, but eventually he forced himself to tell them that Liam was nowhere to be seen and he couldn't find him. It became quiet. The young man began to explain that his friend had forgotten something, so he returned. No matter how long I waited for him, he still did not return, so I went to look for him myself. I found a friend's sword in front of the locker room. This seemed strange to the prince, because no one, especially from the faculty of chivalry, would leave their sword, as if Osman read his thoughts and said the same thing. The boys asked if Agni had noticed anything. The young man replied that he saw only a crowd of worried schoolgirls, but nothing else. Fascias thought again and remembered that Liam had recently started to be called a hero, so they felt something bad. They began to suspect that something bad had happened to him. In his mind, the prince also began to worry about it, but he forced himself to ignore it, because he was sure that it was not his problem. However, he suddenly remembered how this boy laughed, and this laughter entered his soul. Clenching his teeth, the prince turned sharply and without saying a word went to personally look for Lors. Meanwhile, the thieves who grabbed Lenali completely immobilized her and threw her on the floor of some old warehouse. She looked at them, not understanding for what purpose they were beating her. The men just laughed. In the end, one of the attackers, noticing her facial expression, decided to report that the customer did not like that she was among the chosen ones. Such unfriendliness made the girl very angry. The thieves were ordered to neutralize her, so they had to break at least one of her arms so that she could not take part in the battles. The men laughed again, and taking out their weapons began to prepare for work. But she was not going to give up so easily, and taking advantage of the moment when the thieves were distracted for a moment, she quickly got up and rushed at one of them, trying to call someone for help. The girl deliberately lunged at the knife to take off the bandage, but with it she inflicted a wound on her cheek. But she did not pay attention to it at all and began to scream for help as hard as she could, but she was grabbed again. The men threw her hard on the ground and this blow knocked all the spirit out of her. She had no strength to scream anymore. One of the thieves noticed that the young man was too nimble and strong, so they decided to break his leg. But before they had time to do anything, the prince crashed into the building. The enemy immediately turned at the sound of the broken door and looked at the enemy in shock, unable to believe that they had been exposed. Dylan quickly looked around for Liam and found him pressed up against the crates with his shirt torn. From what he saw, anger began to be released with such force that it was difficult to control it. The criminals froze because they immediately understood who was standing in front of them. However, they did not agree to meet the crown prince here, so they quickly decided to leave this place and went on the attack. However, the prince repelled the attack of the unarmed criminals without any problems, and they scattered to different corners of the room. While those two were unconscious, he tackled the rest and defeated them one by one. If she didn't want to, but the only thing she could do so far was to watch the prince's fight. Even so, she understood that he didn't need help. The only thing I was interested in was how Dylan ended up here. When he defeated all the enemies, he immediately looked back at her and, laying down his weapons, began to approach. She could not believe that the prince came to her rescue. Suddenly, she realized that her shirt was torn. The girl panicked, because she was afraid that as soon as the prince came closer, she would immediately see that in front of him was not a boy, but a girl. She wanted to get up, but her injured leg did not allow it. Ran up to her and threw a jacket over her. She looked at him with surprise, and he said that he would give the thing back later. She was surprised that Dylan didn't feel disgusted. Linali could not understand why the prince behaved so kindly towards her, and even smiled warmly at her. The rest of the Fasias eventually ran into the warehouse and began to look around in shock. The heir asked Eldrick to call the guards. After standing for a moment, the boy obeyed and went to look for the guards. Dylan, meanwhile, began to cut the laces and release Liam from his bonds. Having freed herself from the ropes, she began to rub her wrists, which also hurt from being in an uncomfortable position for such a long time. The girl was only interested in one thing: how exactly Fascius managed to find her. Kyle's personal wolves, who were just running to their master, contributed to this. The girl was no less surprised to see them. The next moment, the animals jumped on the boy's neck and became a cape. Without explaining anything else, Krishya approached one of the attackers and began to ask him about the customer. The girl hoped to hear the name of the person who wanted to harm her, but the criminal was silent. The enemy would rather die than expose the master's name, but it even pleased the magician, and he again summoned one of the wolves to fulfill the thief's wishes. The man was not jokingly afraid of the wolf's teeth. The prince saw that Liam could not get up, so he asked if his legs hurt, to which he received an affirmative answer. Without waiting more than a minute, he put his arms around the victim and quickly helped him up. She began to worry a lot about this, because they were too close to each other. To make the boy more comfortable, Dylan tried to wrap his arms around his waist, but accidentally grabbed a little higher. The girl felt this touch on her chest and tried to quickly shake off the prince's hand, covering herself with her hand. She was very afraid that she would be exposed. The heir seemed to have realized something. The prince tried to speak, but the words did not come. The girl was very frightened that he had guessed her essence, so she began to think about how to answer, but nothing came to mind. The heart was beating wildly. Linali tried to answer something, but the prince interrupted because he thought that she had a serious injury on her chest. This made her open her mouth, unable to answer. Kyle had heard all about it too. The prince continued and said that when he was helping to carry him, he accidentally touched his chest and something swelled there. The mage could barely contain his laughter from what he heard, and the girl could not find the words to explain. It was unbelievable that the prince did not think that there was a girl in front of him, so he used the moment to confirm that she had been hit in that place, so there must have been a party. The prince worried that no bones would be broken. The heir personally wanted to check whether everything was intact with Liam. Then she again thought that she was trapped, because this is how the truth will be revealed. But Kyle came to the rescue in time to inspect. She was happy and grateful to her savior. When the prince stepped aside, the magician laughed that Dylan was a bit narrow-minded. The girl took her words back, because she saw that he was amused by the situation. The next moment, using his healing magic, the boy instantly healed all her wounds. Not a single trace of them remained. Even the injured leg no longer hurt. She personally checked. Linali really didn't feel any pain. Looking at her savior, she realized that he had already saved her twice. Also, the healing magic was really cool. The prince watched all the time. The heir thought again about Lim's chest injury. He looked at his hand and couldn't understand why this lump was very soft, like a girl's. The young man suddenly stopped because he was thinking about the wrong thing. It even became a shame that he thought in such a way about the wounded man, besides the boy. But when he looked at him again, Everything was forgotten in an instant. He couldn't take his eyes off that smile. The prince heard Liam thanking Kyle for healing his wounds, while he stood with his fist tightly clenched. It was insulting that there was not a single word of thanks from him, because he was the one who saved him. Some strange feeling. After this incident, the culprits were immediately caught, including the customer, the son of Count Demble. 3 more students involved in this crime were expelled from the academy. Several days have passed. The training of the chosen ones gained more and more momentum every day. The students trained tirelessly. Lenali was already firmly on her feet after the experience and took part in the confrontation against Agni. This time, the victory was again hers. The friend even collapsed on the ground from overexertion and praised her for her agility. The girl also praised him, because everything turned out better for him, and everything was more difficult for her. The comrade said that one day he would definitely take over and smiled. The girl smiled back and approached him to help him stand up. At that moment, Chrissia came up and she said hello. Kyle didn't want her to address him so formally, so he let her call him by his first name. The girl was surprised, but agreed. Suddenly, wolves appeared near him and Lenali was very frightened. She still couldn't get used to the fact that the mage's collar was made of wolf skin, and that he could transform into them. Looking at the boy, the girl asked why he had come, because she doubted that it was for the wolves. While she was petting the wolf, the mage approached her. He wanted the girl to start calling him by his name, but he didn't understand why. The young man tried heavy artillery and threatened to reveal its secret. She was indignant that he liked to tease her so much, but there was nothing she could do about it, so she humbly bowed her head and called him by name. Kyle stared at her with satisfaction, but the girl became angry. The prince approached them and called her. Displeased, she turned her head to meet him. He wanted her to fight him, but it scared her because she didn't want to put herself in any more danger. She did not understand why she received so much attention from His Majesty. While these 3 were arguing, the other members of Phaseus watched them. It was also unclear to Osman why the prince was getting Liam. He assumed it might be because of that boy's cute face. Eldrick didn't care about this, but hearing such a suggestion made him think that Arnold liked boys, which surprised him quite a bit, if she did not want to avoid this confrontation. But in the end, she was forced to agree. It was more and more difficult to repel the prince's blows, and Lenali realized that he had become stronger since the last moment. In addition, he was physically better than her. This must have been the true power of the air. She understood that she did not have enough strength, but she could take it with dexterity. But the right moment was needed. This time the prince was stronger and eventually knocked the sword out of her hands. At that moment, she stumbled a little and fell fast asleep on the ground. The pain from the blow was a bit stronger than expected, so I came to my senses. Dylan looked at Liam and noticed again that he was quite handsome. The boy spoke to the prince, praising him for the fight, but he was stunned, not understanding why the opponent was so cute. He tried to calm down, but he behaved very strangely at the same time, which caused considerable surprise to Liam. He looked questioningly at His Majesty, while he covered his face in shame. She looked sadly at her hand. It was just an ordinary confrontation, but it showed her that the opponents were getting stronger, so she needed to train more to gain experience. The girl tried to get up, but a sharp pain in her back made her sit down again. Dylan was still standing next to her and worriedly asked what was wrong with her, but she immediately replied that everything was fine. He wanted to give her a hand to help her get up, but before she could accept it, Chrissia came up to them and gave her a hand as well. The prince looked at him somewhat surprised, not expecting to see him. Kyle noticed that the prince was behaving quite unusually for himself. The former tried to explain that it was because Liam was injured because of him, but the latter said he could heal those wounds. A fight eventually broke out between them, and the prince decided to go his own way and ordered Liam to accept his help, while the magician calmly offered his hand. The girl was torn between 2 fires. Everyone offered their help and a hand, but she did not understand what was happening to these 2. Lenali did not know which choice was correct. In the end, she got tired of it and quickly got up on her own. The prince just snorted at this and turned to leave the arena. The training was already over. Chrissia followed, casting a satisfied look at the latter. She was finally able to exhale peacefully. It was evening in the yard. The sun was going down and classes were over. She went to her room in the dormitory of the night faculty and immediately collapsed on the bed. The day was really hard for her. However, this fatigue was rather moral. She kept thinking about why the prince saved her, and then he also talked. The girl began to understand that he showed remarkable signs of attention to her. She did not know why. Lenali hoped that the incident with the poison would be slowly forgotten. After lying down for a moment, she immediately jumped up, because the prince was the one who executed her family, so she did not want to lose her prudence and looked at the table. There was a letter on the table that I completely forgot about. She herself was the sender, so she immediately understood that it was sent by her brother. The girl immediately opened the envelope, hoping to see good news. However, in the letter she read a message from her brother that they had been invited to the ball of His Majesty the Prince, which she had forgotten about. She was stunned by this, because she had to go there as a girl. Panic began to grip even more strongly, because she understood that in this form she would be immediately recognized, and then the whole truth would come out. Lenali couldn't let this happen, but she couldn't refuse to go. Finally, that day came, and she returned to her native home. The girl thought many times to refuse the invitation and came up with excuses, but it was an invitation from the royal family. It could not be refused without a special reason. She exhaled, seeing this as hopeless. However, the fact of visiting was important, so you could just come and stay for a while and leave. The girl went on and finally opened the door of the house. She was immediately greeted by all the maids who were in the palace. Lenali was also very happy to see them all, but did not have time to say anything more. The maids immediately grabbed her and carried her to the bathroom, which had been prepared in advance. The lady asked to wait and give her some time because she had just arrived, but the girls scolded her that she should have come sooner. The girls put her in a warm bath where she was finally able to relax. One of the maids remarked that she would never get used to her short hair, but the lady said that it was necessary and convenient. The girl relaxed again. She really missed Maya washing her hair. Lenali thought about what the maid had said earlier, because she couldn't go to the ball with that hairstyle. Finally, the preparations were finished and the maids were overjoyed to see her so beautiful again. She looked at herself in the mirror and was somewhat surprised at the new image, which was different. It was unusual to see myself without a sword in my hand. Her hands look at her short hair again. A knocking in the room broke me from my thoughts. Her brother came to her and she immediately looked around, forgetting about everything. The son of the Marquis was no less beautifully dressed and fully prepared for the ball. The girl immediately rushed to him with questions whether he was all right and things were going well, which could not but please her. The brother immediately noticed her short hair and wondered if she was going to go to the ball like that. The girl was happy to stay at home, but Liam knew how to quickly solve the problem. She was surprised. He said something quietly and put his hand on her head. In a moment, the girl had long hair again, as before. Lenali was quite surprised by her brother's abilities, but now she had to go to the ball. She was a little upset because she tried everything to avoid going to the ball, but her brother called her and offered his hand. Seeing him like this, she was moved and offered her hand in response, and they left. While riding in the carriage, the sister told him in detail about life at the academy, as well as about her adventures. However, she was forced to warn him against communicating with some acquaintances, especially Phacius. She also asked him not to interfere anywhere and not to decide anything without her. The brother agreed again, as he did 10 minutes ago, because his sister had already told him about all this a couple of times and he remembered. However, no matter how often she told him about it, the anxiety did not want to go away. The girl was very worried that something could suddenly happen between the prince and her brother, which would lead to execution. And I didn't want to think about what might happen if the truth about their replacement was revealed, because I knew that the consequences would be terrible. The carriage sped along as fast as she could while she was thinking about it. Eventually, they arrived at the royal palace and immediately reported it. Liam came out first with words of support for her. The girl eventually calmed down and got out of the carriage, taking her brother's hand. If things didn't work out in the future. But at the moment, I didn't want to worry about it, because having gone so far, there was no way back. Now it was a battlefield and she and her brother would do their best. As soon as they entered the hall, they immediately caught the attention of all the guests. Various rumors began to circulate around. Looking at them, some of the guests began to rate them, because they saw them together for the first time. Special attention was paid to Lenali, who was talked about as if she was too arrogant. However, most could not believe it, because they saw how cute she was in appearance. The young lady looked around herself because she was at the ball for the first time. Before that, she always thought that this kind of action was too boring, but after seeing how beautiful it was around, she changed her mind. One of the guests wanted to approach her to talk, but was immediately stopped, because she already had a fiancé, Bergman himself. The girl looked around, feeling these appraising looks on her. She immediately asked her brother if she did not look strange. Liam didn't understand what his sister meant, because in his opinion she looked 100 times better today than usual. She got emotional. Before he could say another word, His sister looked behind him and saw behind them a whole table filled with delicious dishes. The girl immediately pointed it out, and the brother quietly laughed. The brother was glad that no matter what his sister looked like, she always remained herself. The girl was a little indignant, hoping that it was a compliment. Liam was just glad she was like that. Suddenly, she saw a place where there were few people, so she was glad to take advantage of it. She wanted to spend the rest of the time at the ball inconspicuously, so she went there quietly, hiding as much as possible. However, he and his brother did not have time to leave when Maria Rush blocked their way. The brother and sister looked at her without understanding anything, and during this time, several more respectable young ladies came up. One by one, they began to surround Liam, preventing him from passing. Lenali was pushed away, and she was left standing aside, watching her brother disappear into the crowd of girls. It seemed to her that they were all from the academy, so she was happy about her brother's popularity. At that moment, the huge doors of the hall opened and Fascius entered the ball. Everything was quiet around for a moment. Everyone was looking at them. Each of the young men attracted a lot of attention. They were dressed just perfectly, so it was not surprising. However, Lenali did not share the enthusiasm of the crowd because she understood that she could get into trouble. The girl quickly looked around in search of her brother to warn him, but the boy was found. The young lady decided to look for him in other rooms of the palace, hoping that he would be in one of them. However, she could not find him in any of the rooms. The girl began to worry, because the Fascias were already at the ball and this could cause problems. Floating in her thoughts, she accidentally bumped into someone. The girl apologized for this, but she froze almost immediately because in front of her was Kyle. She started apologizing even harder, not understanding in her mind how she could have confronted him like that. It was a failure. The guy just laughed in response, wondering where her energy had gone. She tried to back away, but he took her hand and kissed it welcomingly, because it was the first time he had seen her in such an outfit. Chrysia complimented her on this, but they were only surprised, even a little indignant. However, stepping over herself, she thanked for the kind words and tried to retreat again, but in vain. He did not want to let her go and even said that he wanted only him to be able to look at this beauty. He even wanted to close it somewhere so that no one else could look at it except him. Believing in his words, she was quite frightened. It seemed to her that this day was the worst in her life. Chrysia decided to change the subject and asked what the girl forgot while wandering in these corridors. She was still looking for Liam, but she couldn't tell it, because she already guessed the magician's reaction to it. So she said that it was nothing special, so she would go back to the hall. The guy smiled again and gave her his hand, wanting to get back together. The girl was very surprised and did not understand why Chrysia showed such a great desire to accompany her. She was in no hurry. The mage insisted again and again to lead her, but the girl began to get annoyed. She didn't really want to go back because she could meet the prince. Noticing Lenali's reaction, the young man wanted to bribe with a secret. The girl became even more angry. But she could not go against this because she understood that if her secret was revealed, it would be even worse. So in the end, she offered her hand and agreed to return to the hall together. Their return, even as a couple, did not go unnoticed, and they immediately began to pay attention to them. People thought they were a beautiful couple, but there were rumors that Lenali was already engaged to the son of Marquis Wergman. The young lady heard all these voices, but she could not hear about what exactly. But she was sure that everyone said that she was not suitable for Chrysia. The boy smiled when he saw the girl's face. Lenali quickly freed her hand, thanked Kyle for everything, and informed her that she still had important things to do, so she hurried off to find her brother eventually. However, someone grabbed her again and she looked around. The magician again did not want to let her go and offered to dance. The girl tried to refuse because there were rules for the first dance, which could only be performed by engaged people or close relatives. If she danced with him, then everyone would mistakenly think something was wrong, and the girl could see that Kyle understood that. She laughed quietly, pretending that it must have been a joke on his part, but she had to refuse. Chrysia smiled back but did not insist and let her go. Lenali continued to look for her brother, but no matter where she looked, he was nowhere to be found, not even among the guests, so she was completely lost. She began to worry that her brother might have left her and gone home, but she hoped that was not the case. The girl suddenly felt very tired and someone called out from behind. The stranger offered to dance. In a moment, another one came from somewhere and also offered his candidacy. The girl was stunned, and within a minute a fight had already started between the boys, in which she did not want to get involved. There were more and more of them. While the boys argued among themselves who would take the daughter of the Marquis as a partner, she meanwhile began to look for ways out. Looking behind her, she saw that the balcony was very close. Seeing this as an excellent opportunity to escape, she informed the suitors that she had urgent business, so she had to leave quickly. They wanted to stop her, but she stopped listening and ran to freedom. Although this concession was rather low, it is currently the only option for salvation, so the girl did not hesitate and jumped out of the balcony into the street. But the prince was walking along the road, walking in the garden. While still in the air, looking the prince straight in the eyes, she understood that her second life would be completed. In a moment, she was already lying on him, pressed to the ground. The boy writhed a little from pain and unexpectedness. She was the first to wake up and was very frightened, because she was sure that the prince was in the hall, so she did not know how to get out now. The young man also began to come to his senses and, with an angry look, told her to get off. Seeing the girl's face, he immediately remembered Liam, because of which she was even more frightened, because she realized that she was recognized. The lady began to think to answer. The prince asked why he was like that. The lady quickly examined herself and realized that nothing terrible had happened, because now she was in the form of a girl and immediately told about it. The prince was surprised to see the boy's twin sister in front of him. The girl quickly got up and introduced herself while bowing. Dylan now personally saw that the rumors about her were true, but he still had the feeling that in front of him was Liam dressed in a dress. Linali thought, remembering the rumors about her and remembered how the prince did not speak very well of her at the academy. She was indignant and angry with him, which is why she screamed. However, she fell silent in a moment, because she understood that she had made a mistake, because she dared to speak in such a tone to the crown prince. The young man only laughed loudly at this, which greatly surprised her. For himself, he understood that the rumors were true after all, because at first she fell for him, and after that she also began to reproach him. The lady was surprised that the prince was not angry and apologized in a moment. Suddenly she grabbed his hand and, removing the glove, noticed that the prince was injured. The wound was not serious, as he said, but the girl did not listen, and taking her handkerchief began to treat the wound. The prince did not resist, but only silently began to look at her. His heart beat faster, his face turned red, and he couldn't understand why. In a moment she finished and asked him to treat the wound properly. The girl instantly realized that she had touched the prince without permission, so she started apologizing for it again, but he was not angry. Only looking at her, he remembered Liam again, which could not help but worry. She almost began to despair, because she understood that she had made many mistakes, starting with the fact that she fell for the prince himself. Not only that, she spoke rudely and also injured me, so she was afraid of execution. Linali wanted to leave before the prince uttered those terrible words, and was about to say goodbye when her stomach rumbled sharply and she fell silent. The heir could not help but laugh again. The girl felt ashamed for this, but everything seemed very interesting to him, because he had never seen such an unpredictable lady, who was angry a moment ago, and was already concerned about his condition. She also managed to change her facial expressions so quickly. He suddenly wanted to meet her again. The lady apologized and wanted to leave, but he stopped her, hoping to see her again. It had been a few days since the ball, and a lot had happened in that time, so the prince first approached her when they were training for the Chosen. The girl looked around while Dylan finished his words. The prince finally spoke and wanted to ask about Liam's sister. The girl was stunned for a moment, because she thought that His Majesty was still angry because of the trauma that happened because of her. Evil thoughts began to fill his head again, and the water already imagined how the prince ordered to execute Linali. The girl almost fell into despair, because she could not believe that all efforts to avoid punishment were in vain. The heir wanted to inquire whether his sister sometimes did not say anything about him, but he did not have time to ask this question because Linali, frightened by the future, bowed and began to beg for forgiveness. Dylan was surprised when he realized that the lady had mentioned him to her brother after all. The boy was embarrassed but did not say anything else. The girl was surprised that he did not get angry on that occasion. The prince looked at the boy and realized that the two were very similar, but he didn't understand why looking at Liam reminded him of his sister. And again, the heart beat loudly. These two were too similar. Suddenly, he realized that he liked not Liam, but his sister because their faces were the same. That's why his heart was pounding so much. These thoughts made me feel better. The girl could not understand what was happening. Seeing that the prince was smiling, she decided to seize the moment and informed her that her sister was very worried about the prince because of his injury. Hearing this, the heir suddenly came to his senses. She didn't expect the prince to be so surprised just because she was worried about him. However, she saw that he was not angry at all, but was somehow pensive. Their conversation was interrupted by Osman, who rushed at her. Bacart and Chrysia came after him. The girl was glad to see her. One of them said that he was also glad to meet, because at the ball they could not talk properly, except to say hello. Suddenly, Kyle reported that someone was coming back. The girl did not understand who they were talking about, but no one was in a hurry to explain, but they only mysteriously described the stranger. It was said that the academy is standing on its feet. Eldrick said that he was a young and very talented knight, whose swordsmanship was so good that he was recognized not only in the academy, but also in the royal guard, so he took 2 paths. He was listed as a student of the academy, but he was nicknamed the Ghost, as he does not appear here due to the fact that he participated in various expeditions. The girl thought again about what she had heard. Seeing that Lenali had no way of understanding who he was talking about, Kyle said that this boy was still the prince's arch-rival, but the prince denied it, saying that this student was simply stronger. In addition, Dylan knew that this student was already betrothed to the Marquise's daughter. Osman only laughed at this, surprised that the prince accepted his defeat so easily for the first time. That's why he liked the Ghost. However, no matter how much the boys praised or described the stranger, Lenali still couldn't figure out who they were talking about, much to everyone's surprise. Kyle whispered about her fiancé. She jumped at what she heard, and Eldrick was surprised that the boy did not know about it, because Vergman was his sister's fiancé. The girl knew about it, but did not expect that he would return so quickly. She wanted to leave the arena now, so she said that she must have received a letter from her family. She must read it. In her head, she was thinking about what to do next, because she did not know what was in Vergman's mind. She was going with the whole crew to the camp, which was intended for the chosen ones. There was porridge in her head. The girl could not stop worrying about her fiancé because she was afraid that he might expose her. Agni was sitting next to him. He also distracted her from her thoughts, because for him going to this camp was a great opportunity, so he was very happy about it. So much so that he could not sleep all night. She didn't really share it. For her, this camp could mean the end, until suddenly a friend informed that, most likely, Vergman will not join the camp. Hearing this, she instantly perked up, not believing that she would be saved. Her joy knew no bounds. Finally, she can just enjoy the camp. However, this joy did not last long because there were not enough rooms, so everyone was accommodated 2 at a time, and she hoped to get a separate room. In addition, the bathroom was also shared, and she cannot wash with everyone. At that moment, a happy Agni jumped up and said that he would be happy to live together. But for her, it was a horror and she did not know what to do. Kyle observed this situation, so he approached her with an offer to live together. The rest of the Fascias heard this, so they were quite surprised. She was also somewhat surprised, but thought about it. The prince did not like this, so he wanted an explanation from his friend. The magician only smiled because he saw that His Majesty would also like to live together with Liam, at which he received an indignant look. The girl wondered why Chrysia suggested this. The guy explained that his room would have a separate bathroom. It bought her quite a bit because it was the only thing she wanted. Besides, he knew that she was a girl. She thought again, although for her it was a great opportunity. Lenali understood that this way she would be able to take a bath by herself, and living with a magician was less risky, but she did not want to disappoint Agni. The prince looked at her thoughtful face and did not understand why these two suddenly decided to live together, because there was no reason for it. It was still strange that Liam had thought about it for so long. However, she still couldn't dare, even though there was always a better option to look for, but she still didn't want to live under the same roof with a boy. Kyle moved closer to her, waiting for her decision. In the end, the girl had to agree. Satisfied, the magician led her to his chambers. The room was designed for one person, but it was big enough for the 2 of them. She was quite surprised by such luxury. Chrysia said that last year it was Dylan's room, so after that it was completely rebuilt. This news did not even surprise her. Enchanted, the girl began to walk around the room examining every detail. The bed was so big even though it was designed for one person. While she was looking around, the magician approached her, expecting thanks for saving her, and the girl refused him to dance at the ball. She was ashamed of it, but she couldn't do anything about it. But she didn't understand what kind of thanks was expected from her. But she realized that the young man was playing with her. The girl took a pose. She was not going to give up just like that, so she was ready to fulfill his wish, whatever it might be. Seeing her expression, he smiled. It amused and interested him. He stood silently and just looked at her. It seemed to her that she had done something wrong, but she was still waiting for his answer. At first, it was all a game to kill time for him. He liked to watch the reactions. In a moment, he announced that next time he wanted to be her partner at the ball. Lenali didn't say anything to this. She just looked into his eyes, which began to glow strangely. Kyle realized he didn't want to share her.